the finger pointing to the moon. High on a mountain, where clouds blend with mist and silence is only interrupted by the songs of birds, stood a small Zen monastery. The place seemed suspended in time, as if the outside world did not exist. The stone walls of the monastery were covered in moss, and the thatched roof sloped gently toward the ground, as if weary from bearing the weight of centuries. There lived Master Ryokan, a man with white hair and deep eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of 1,000 lives. Ryokan was no ordinary teacher. His teachings were not based on long speeches or complex philosophies, but on simple gestures and questions that left his disciples in deep reflection. The monastery was not a place of luxury. The rooms were small and austere, with worn tatami mats and paper windows that let in the faint light of dawn. In the center of the courtyard stood an old cherry tree, its branches stretching out like protective arms over the garden. Under that tree, Ryokan would spend hours in meditation, as still as a rock, while leaves fell around him and the wind whispered secrets only he seemed to understand. One day, a young man named Kaito arrived at the monastery. He had traveled from a distant village, carrying a backpack full of books and a heart full of questions. Kaito was slender, with an intense gaze and an insatiable curiosity that had led him to walk dusty paths and cross raging rivers in search of answers. He had read everything he could find about Zen, the sutras, the koans, the teachings of ancient masters. But something inside him whispered that true knowledge was not in the pages of books but in direct experience. Upon arrival, Kaito was greeted by Ryokan, who looked at him with a calm smile. The master said nothing, but his presence was so soothing that Kaito felt his worries dissolve, as if time had paused for a moment. "Master," said Kaito, bowing respectfully, "I have come to learn from you. I want to understand the truth." Ryokan nodded slowly and, without saying a word, pointed to the sky. Kaito followed the direction of the master's finger and saw the moon, round and bright, illuminating the night. The moon seemed suspended in the sky like a beacon of peace, its silvery light bathing the monastery and the surrounding forest. "There is the truth," said Ryokan, his voice soft but firm. Kaito stared at the master's finger, then at the moon, and then back at the finger. His mind began to race, trying to decipher the meaning of that gesture. Was it a symbol? A metaphor? A code to be deciphered? "What does this mean, master?" he asked, confused. Ryokan did not answer. He simply turned around and entered the monastery, leaving Kaito alone under the moonlight. That night, Kaito could not sleep. His mind was filled with questions. Why did the master point to the moon? What was special about that gesture? Was it a test? A lesson? He spent hours analyzing every detail, every possible meaning, but the more he thought, the further he seemed from the answer. The silence of the monastery, which had once felt comforting, now overwhelmed him. The chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind in the trees seemed to mock his confusion. At dawn, Kaito went to the garden and found Ryokan sitting in meditation under the cherry tree. The master seemed in perfect harmony with the world, as if he were part of the landscape. Kaito approached carefully, not wanting to interrupt, but his restlessness was too great. "Master," said Kaito in a low voice, "I don't understand. Why did you point to the moon?" Ryokan opened his eyes and looked at him with a serene expression. "Why are you looking at my finger?" he asked. Kaito fell silent. He didn't know how to respond. Ryokan stood up and, without another word, walked toward the forest. Kaito followed him, determined to find the answer he so desperately sought. The forest was dense and mysterious, with ancient trees whose branches intertwined to form a canopy that barely let sunlight through. The ground was covered in dry leaves and moss, and the air smelled of damp earth and old wood. Ryokan walked with steady steps, while Kaito stumbled over roots and stones, struggling to keep up. "Master," said Kaito, panting. "Where are we going?" Ryokan did not answer. Instead, he stopped by a crystal-clear stream and pointed at the flowing water. "Look," he said, "the water never stops." Kaito looked at the stream, but his mind was still trapped in the image of the master's finger pointing to the moon. "Master, what does this have to do with the moon?" he asked. Ryokan smiled. "The water flows, the moon shines, the finger points. What more do you need to understand?" Kaito frowned. The master's words seemed enigmatic, almost absurd. How could water and the moon help him understand the truth? Back at the monastery, Ryokan gave Kaito a task. He had to fill a barrel with water using only a bowl full of holes. Kaito tried over and over, but the water escaped before he could pour it into the barrel. Frustrated, he asked the master, "How can I fill the barrel if the bowl is broken?" Ryokan replied, "Why are you trying to fill the barrel? Watch the water." Kaito looked at the water falling to the ground, forming small puddles. Suddenly, he understood that the water did not need to be contained to exist. It simply flowed, like the stream in the forest. It was free, unbound, without worries. And in that moment, Kaito felt something inside him begin to change. Days passed, and Kaito continued with his tasks at the monastery. He swept the garden, cooked, meditated under the cherry tree. But now, instead of seeking answers in every gesture of the master, he began to observe the world around him with new eyes. He noticed how the cherry leaves fell softly to the ground, how the clouds formed and dissolved in the sky, how the wind played with the flowers in the garden. And little by little, the questions that tormented him began to lose their importance. One night, after months of meditation and seemingly meaningless tasks, Kaito sat under the moon. This time, he did not think about the master's finger or the questions that haunted him. He simply observed the moon, bright and serene. The silver light illuminated his face, and Kaito felt something inside him open, like a flower finally seeing the sunlight. At that moment, something changed within him. The moon was no longer a symbol or an enigma. It was simply the moon as it was. Kaito felt a deep peace, as if he had found something that had always been there but had never seen. He ran to the master and said, "I understand. The moon is not a message, nor a symbol. It's just the moon." Ryokan smiled and replied, "Then why are you telling me?" Kaito laughed, realizing that the truth did not need to be explained or shared. It simply was. Years later, Kaito became a master. When a new disciple arrived at the monastery, full of questions and thirst for knowledge, Kaito pointed to the moon and said, "There is the truth." The disciple looked at Kaito's finger, confused. Kaito smiled, remembering his own journey, and knew that each person must find their own moon. Final reflection. The story of the finger pointing to the moon is a powerful metaphor about the search for truth. Often, we focus on the means, the finger, instead of looking at what truly matters, the moon. Zen teaches us that truth cannot be taught directly. It can only be pointed to. Each person must walk their own path to discover it. At first, Kaito was so obsessed with understanding the master's gesture that he forgot to look at the moon. He spent entire nights analyzing, questioning, searching for answers in the wrong places. But the truth was not in the finger, nor in the master's words, nor in the books he had read. It was in direct experience, in observation without judgment, in the acceptance of what is. The water in the stream, the bowl with holes, the moon in the sky. These were all lessons Ryokan was giving him. But Kaito couldn't see them because he was too busy searching for answers. Only when he stopped searching, when he allowed himself to simply be, Did he understand that the truth had always been there, waiting to be seen? The story invites us to reflect on how we seek truth in our own lives. Often, we get lost in details, explanations, and methods, forgetting that the truth is right in front of us, waiting to be seen. Zen reminds us that truth cannot be taught with words. It can only be pointed to. Each of us must look beyond the finger and find our own moon. Ultimately, the finger pointing to the moon is an invitation to let go of our preconceptions, to stop searching for answers in the wrong places, and to open ourselves to the direct experience of reality. It is a lesson in humility, patience, and the understanding that truth is not outside of us but within, waiting to be discovered.